I wanted to ask you about the lineups for Big Black. So there was two lineups. There was you, Santiago, Jeff, you, Santiago, Dave. Was there anything significantly different about the chemistry at all between the two different lineups?
Yeah, initially, like when I first started the band and Jeff and Santiago agreed to play in the band with me, I was dumbstruck. Like both of those guys were giants to me, you know. Jeff and Santiago had been in Naked Raygun together, and Naked Raygun were like an epoch-making band in Chicago. They were one of the cornerstones of the scene, not just because their music was fantastic, but like they sort of exemplified how a band could conduct themselves. Like they had a practice space in the basement of the house they rented, so all of their friends were welcome to use that practice space. They had a PA that they used for their gigs, so all of their friends were welcome to use their PA for their gigs. There was just they embodied the kind of camaraderie and we're all in this together kind of spirit, which initially appealed to me so much about the music scene here. You know, I really felt like everybody here was working on one big project. It wasn't that there were a bunch of disparate independent individual bands that were trying to make their mark or whatever. It was that you had a bunch of people that all wanted things to get more awesome, and they would do whatever it took to make them more awesome. And so Naked Raygun were, you know, a huge influence on me as a person and as a musician. And then to have the two principal members of Naked Raygun agree to be in a band with me was, I mean, flattering is not the right word for it. It was kind of, if you can imagine some guy playing in a bar band and he decides that he's going to start his own band, and, you know, Charlie Watts and Mick Jagger agree to be in his band with him. Like, it's that scale of dumbstruck is how I felt, you know. So I was intimidated by them, and I kind of idolized them a little bit. But as we got into the process of being in the band, it, you know, became a genuine collaboration and a genuine sharing of ideas and stuff. At some point, though, Jeff Pizzotti was just way too busy with all of his other pursuits. He was in a couple of other bands as well as a kind of a side member. He had a full-time job. He had a serious girlfriend. He was trying to start a life with her. He had a full-time job. He was going to be eventually going to have to take over his father's business. And Naked Raygun was getting more popular and doing more recording and more touring as well, so he was quite busy there. So it just seemed impossible for him to carry all of these torches, and he bowed out. And Santiago had run into Dave Riley at a gig. He was in a band called Savage Beliefs, and Santiago and I both admired Savage Beliefs. We thought they were a real cool, real stylish band. And Dave was a really fluid bass player. Like, a lot of the bass parts in those songs were kind of the signature elements of the Savage Belief songs, where he would be playing the sort of foundational riff, and the whole rest of the band would just sort of be hanging on that. And we both liked the way that he could sort of take control of the music from the bass chair, as opposed to just sort of trying to fit in a polite fashion. Santiago asked him if he wanted to try out to be our bass player, and musically he was orders of magnitude ahead of me, and he could play guitar better than I could play guitar, of course. I was quite limited as a guitarist and still am, but what I liked about his approach to the bass guitar was that he didn't just come up with a part and stick to it. Over the course of working on a song, you know, every time we'd play the song, he would come up with little decorative embellishments or little subtleties about the pattern that he could use to emphasize the duration of the bar or that sort of thing. And some of that, I think, is rooted in his appreciation of the psychedelic funk stuff. Like, he was very influenced by Bootsy Collins and Funkadelic, and I think that, while not immediately evident evident in our music and the style of our music, but the degree of decoration or the degree of significance that the bass parts had, I think that's the influence, where the influence manifested itself.
Atomizer was the first record you guys did with Dave. How did that experience recording with Dave differ from the experience of recording with Jeff?
The earlier recordings were real slapdash. Like the first EP was me recording in my apartment. The second EP was us trying to take advantage of a studio that a friend of ours, Ian Burgess, was an engineer at, and he had limited time that was available to him that we could get at a kind of a discount. So we were sort of race in, do a couple of songs, and then run out, you know. That lent itself toward these records of short duration. Like the first 3 Big Black records were EPs, and that was a purely practical matter. Like we'd get a small number of songs together, we'd get a small amount of money together, we'd go into the studio for a short period of time, chop a record out and put it out. And we did that a couple, 3 times before we had the resources available to do a proper album. And so by the time Atomizer came around, we sort of looked at it as a couple of these EP sessions strung together. Like we would do the same thing that we did on the initial for an EP, but then we would do it 3 times, and then that would be an album. The first thing that we did with Dave was we had a session where we did the Il Duce single, and one side of that single, Il Duce, was recorded with Jeff Pezzati, and the other side of that single, the song Big Money, was recorded with Dave Riley. So it was that single was kind of a bridge between the 2 eras of the band. And like stylistically, you can tell like the Il Duce is more in keeping with the earlier, sparser, more minimal, more nearly electronic version of the band, and the Big Money is more raucous and more dense and more sort of in the driving punk mentality. And I would say we sort of gravitated more toward that mentality after Dave joined the band.
Big Black was active from 1981 to 1987. During this time, Big Black released 2 studio records, 4 EPs, and 5 singles, as well as 2 live albums and 2 compilation albums. Through parts of 81 to 83, Big Black consisted of only Steve Albini. Through parts of 83 to 84, the band's lineup consisted of Steve Albini, Santiago Durango, and Jeff Pezzati. The band's final lineup through parts of 85 to 87 consisted of Steve Albini, Santiago Durango, and Dave Riley. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what you see, make sure to subscribe for more. All the videos on this channel are original. I'm the one conducting all the interviews and editing all the videos together. So if you guys like what you see and you want to support, the best way to do so is honestly just to subscribe. Lots more to come.